Okay, talking about exploring workspace experience options. So focused on how we might present workspace to the end user. So this next one I want to talk about is workspace as a container for horizontal aggregation. So create a new type of container that is used to aggregate items outside of the tree structure. Probably a pretty confusing description at this point. Basically what I'm saying is include everything, all the changes outlined in workspace as a top level group. So basically just rely on groups and top level groups. Groups are the workspace in the sense that it contains all of your organizational things. But what we saw in workspace as top level groups, one of the main things that this one, and honestly none of them that we've gone over at this point have solved, is anything to do with the hierarchy. So what if, in addition to the workspace as top level groups, we built another object whose job it was to solve some of the hierarchy things? So what I mean is a new thing whose job it is to collect other things that can have things basically shared into it. So while groups kind of have a tree structure to them, a project over here and a project over here can't share assets unless they're underneath the same group, and you kind of get into the situation where it's impossible to have like two groups because they end up kind of parallel to each other and they need to talk across each other. So what if, in addition to having groups this way, we built a new object whose job it was to cut across those things and can aggregate horizontally? So taking a look at what that might look like in a flow map. So again, kind of this is everything that we were shown or that we talked about with workspace as top level groups. So everything just kind of rolls up to a top level group up here that you could navigate to through, let's say, the programs from example, and maybe be able to get through groups. Creating a new object that would probably be accessed a different way outside of the groups. Maybe top level navigation would be an example of that. That is workspaces, and workspaces allows you to see items that are in this, and this, but doesn't necessarily sit as a subset of any of these things, right? So the group structure is over here. This is another object whose job it is to allow you to aggregate and share things and get this kind of cross-level cutting view. So very similar to, I won't go through all these problem statements because it's very similar to workspace as a top level group, but what it does solve for is the hierarchy problems. So when I say the hierarchy problems, I mean assets being tied to a single namespace limit the ability to leverage them. It kind of solves that one. It doesn't solve it perfectly because you still wouldn't be able to like utilize assets in projects that were in other projects. It's really more of a consumption side of things. So maybe I need to fix that one. I actually don't think that it does solve that one. What it does is allow you to see things across, right? So optimizing for one view doesn't let you see it, and makes it suboptimal to see other views. It's basically solving the consumption side of the sharing problem. So whether it's at the top level or some other point in the level, will allow you to basically just roll assets up to it and be able to view them, understand if a project spans, 3 different projects, let's say it's front end, back end, and whatever, DevOps. If there's issues for each one of those, you have to do that. That would allow you to cross-cut, see where the 3 issues in those 3 things are. If that makes sense. So some drawbacks to it though. Again, there's no control over user namespaces. Access for would require a additional setup and maintenance. I think this one's a very big problem because it is, since it lives outside of that hierarchy, somehow access to this has to be controlled, which would probably have to be some third access way of doing things. So you'd have to set up and maintain that. That would be a real problem. Again, it does add an additional mental model. There's this other place again that I have to go if I want to see things this way. If I want to see them here, I go here. If I want to see them here, I have to go to this other thing, which causes additional navigation. And really, like, the namespaces themselves would kind of benefit from this. So you're building an object that's solving these problems, but much like when we build things at the admin level that namespaces need, really namespaces are going to want this as well. So before well, yeah, let me go into this next one. Yeah, let's just do both of these at the same time. So Workspace as a feature of horizontal aggregation is really the exact same idea, but just moving it to live as a subset of a as a namespace. So basically building a feature in namespace that allows you this view, which would solve the it solves the navigational and then additional mental model problems, and it solves the access, because access would just be inherited from the rest of the project or group. It still wouldn't necessarily solve the using of an asset over here. Labels are a good example, right? So if I'm in a project here and a project here, I'm gonna be able to see across labels, but you also want the mechanism to be able to utilize this. I want to apply this label that's over here to this issue. I don't know that it necessarily solve for that. And honestly, it kind of feels like these two together, what we're basically saying is need some sort of sharing mechanism. And it's almost maybe like, by presenting it this way, is cheating the system into like building that without necessarily saying, let's just build sharing. Okay, questions on those two?
That was going to that last point that you did in particular was going to be sort of my first comment for the last one, which is it seems like this is just very hyper focused on solving that, being able to see everything across everything, and then the additional solution. It's a similar solution, a similar problem, just maybe a slightly different way of doing it,
Yeah.
pushing it further down as a feature. Being that we did these together and they are so similar, is there a reason to go with one over the other? Are these put together as maybe choosing one or the other to add to another solution, possibly, or maybe just really calling out the fact that seeing assets across everything is very difficult to solve at this point in time?
Yeah. I don't know the engineering that it would take to accomplish these, but I think you're hitting it on the head there, that the idea of sharing is the benefit of these two things, and how it's implemented. This doesn't really solve any of that. I think it's really more like the idea of sharing is really what's beneficial to take away from these. As they're proposed here, no, I don't know that it would make sense to move forward with either one of them.
Yeah. Again, I think that's that call out of that is super important, and it is a huge problem for our users right now, which is being able to see across. And then, I mean, and you make it even more challenging when you say, okay, well, this solves being able to see everything, but how do we actually utilize those things? Like the
Yeah.
labels example is even more difficult. So yeah.
Okay. Let me